Tell me about your experience as a backend developer.
I have 3 years of experience, mainly with Python and Django. In one project, I built an inventory management system for a logistics company, which reduced manual tracking errors by 40%.
What specific challenges did you face?
Handling frequent database writes during peak hours was tough. I resolved it by implementing a write-ahead logging strategy with PostgreSQL.
Can you give an example of a bottleneck you resolved?
Sure, a query aggregating monthly reports took 30 seconds. I optimized it with materialized views, bringing it down to under 1 second.
What's the difference between REST and GraphQL? Can you give an example where you used each?
REST was ideal for a payment API I developed. It had simple, predefined endpoints for predictable operations. For a social media app, I used GraphQL to let the front end fetch nested data like user profiles, posts, and comments in a single query.
What challenges did you face with GraphQL?
Overfetching data increased server load. I solved this by batching queries using tools like Apollo Server.
How do you handle database migrations in production?
I use tools like Alembic for version control and deploy migrations during low traffic periods. For example, adding a column to a large table once caused downtime. I fixed it by adding the column without constraints first, then backfilling data in batches.
How would you debug a slow database query?
In one case, a query filtering millions of rows was slow. I used Explain to analyze execution. Adding a compound index on frequently queried columns reduced runtime by 70%.
What if indexing doesn't solve it?
I'd consider query caching. For example, in a dashboard showing weekly stats, I cached results in Redis, refreshing them every hour.
Explain rate limiting. Can you share an example?
Rate limiting protects against excessive requests. For a login API, I implemented a sliding window algorithm with Redis to block users exceeding 5 attempts in 10 minutes.
How do you handle legitimate spikes?
I allow burst limits, example, temporarily raising limits for high-priority users like admins.
How would you design a URL shortener? Can you provide details on scalability?
I'd use a key-value store like DynamoDB with a hash-based key generator. To scale, I'd implement a partitioning strategy to distribute data across multiple nodes. For example, dividing keys by hash ranges avoids bottlenecks.
What if two users generate the same key?
I'd use retry logic or a service like Snowflake IDs to ensure global uniqueness.
Can you explain how microservices work? Share an example where you implemented them.
Microservices allow independent services to handle specific tasks. In an e-commerce app, I separated order management, payment processing, and inventory into distinct services. This let us deploy payment updates without affecting other modules.
What challenges did you face?
Maintaining consistent data across services was tricky. I solved it by using an event-driven architecture with Kafka for messaging.
How do you ensure safe deployments? Can you share an example?
I follow blue-green deployments. For example, when updating an analytics API, I deployed the new version to a separate environment, ran tests, and gradually shifted traffic using a load balancer.
What if something goes wrong post-deployment?
I use feature flags. For instance, during a feature rollout, users reported errors. Disabling the feature via flags let me debug without a full rollback.
How do you monitor backend systems? Can you provide an example?
I use Prometheus for metrics and Grafana for dashboards. For instance, during a spike in 500 errors, I identified the root cause, a failing external API, through alert logs.
How did you resolve it?
I added a retry mechanism with exponential backoff to handle temporary outages.